Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Three years ago, I was at the top of my game as a stained glass artist, having spent over a decade perfecting my craft at one of the most safety-conscious studios in the country. When I got the opportunity to work at this prestigious studio in Los Angeles, I thought it was my big break. The owner seemed impressed by my background and immediately made me the safety coordinator when he learned about my previous experience. During my first week, he told me my expertise would be invaluable here. If only I'd known those words would come back to haunt me. From day one, I noticed concerning practices and how we handled dangerous materials, lead exposure, acid storage, ventilation issues. The list went on. I took my role seriously, spending weekends poring over safety regulations and guidelines. During one of our meetings, I brought up serious safety concerns about our lead handling procedures, explaining that we needed proper ventilation and protective equipment. The owner dismissed my concerns, saying they'd been doing fine for years and telling me to just add it to the list of suggestions. When I insisted this wasn't just a suggestion but a legal requirement, he brushed me off, saying they'd look into it when the budget allowed. This became our routine. Every safety meeting I bring up violations, and he dismissed them with vague promises. My co-workers started noticing too. One day, a co-worker approached me complaining about getting headaches after working with acid, asking if that was normal. When I told them it absolutely wasn't normal and that we needed better ventilation and proper masks, another co-worker chimed in, mentioning that the owner had told them it was just part of the job. I had to explain to them that this wasn't just part of the job. It was dangerous and illegal. When COVID hit, things got worse. Despite local mandates, masks became optional in the studio. I kept pushing for better protocols, but it fell on deaf ears. Then someone called the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It wasn't me, but the owner's suspicious glares told me he thought otherwise. A week later, they hired someone new. They claimed it was for expansion, but I noticed my safety coordinator duties quietly disappearing. Projects I'd normally handle went to others. Then came the meeting I'll never forget. The owner called me in and announced they were having to make cuts due to lack of work. When I pointed out that they just hired someone new the previous week, he simply told me that unfortunately they had to let me go and my position was being eliminated. It was crystal clear. They'd waited just long enough to make it look legitimate. I was devastated. Los Angeles isn't cheap and I had bills to pay. But sometimes getting pushed off a cliff teaches you that you can fly. I threw myself into my personal art projects. Years of studying traditional techniques while incorporating modern elements started paying off. Small commissions led to bigger ones. My unique safety-conscious approach actually became a selling point with high-end clients. Then last night at a major art event, I ran into him. He looked different, tired, worried. I later learned why from my former co-workers who were also at the event. One of them told me about how the owner had just cut everyone's hours to just 2 days a week, announcing it that very day. Another added that most of them were already looking for new jobs since the studio was barely staying afloat. He approached me at the bar, probably having heard about my recent success. He mentioned hearing about my show, trying to sound casual. I responded by telling him that things were going really well, flashing him a genuine smile. My work is now featured in a prestigious gallery. I'm booked solid for the next 2 years, and I'm doing what I love without compromising safety or my principles. When he walked away, I overheard him talking to someone else. He was finally admitting that maybe they should have taken those safety suggestions more seriously. One of my former co-workers responded that those violations ended up costing more than the fixes would have. The studio that fired me for caring too much about safety is now struggling to keep its doors open, while I'm thriving doing things the right way. My old co-workers are finally realizing that cutting corners never pays off in the long run. I didn't have to do anything for this revenge. Success simply happened because I stuck to my principles and kept pushing forward. I'm 13 years old, and this happened during our family vacation in Florida last summer. My parents had promised me this trip for months since I've been working really hard at school and managed to maintain straight A's despite dealing with some health issues earlier in the year. We were staying at this beautiful beachfront resort, and I was beyond excited because I'd never seen the ocean before. Being from the Midwest, the biggest body of water I'd ever encountered was Lake Michigan. The first 2 days were absolutely perfect, building sandcastles, collecting shells, and just enjoying the waves. On the third day, something happened that I still have nightmares about. It was early afternoon and I was in the water about waist deep. My parents were on the beach and I could see them clearly from where I was. The water was crystal clear and there weren't many people around since it was a weekday. Suddenly I heard someone shouting about a shark from further out in the water. Everyone started scrambling to get out, and naturally, I turned to make my way back to shore too. That's when I felt someone grab my shoulders from behind with an iron grip. I immediately started yelling at her to let me go and asking what she was doing. The woman just ordered me to stay still and not move. I tried to turn around, but she just gripped me harder, her nails digging into my skin. She was this middle-aged woman I'd seen earlier walking up and down the beach in swimwear, acting like she owned the place. I cried out that she was hurting me and begged her to let me go. She just told me to shut up, saying that if the shark came our way, it would get me first. That's when it hit me. This woman was actually trying to use me as a human shield against a shark. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I started screaming for help at the top of my lungs. I could hear my parents screaming from the shore, but they were too far to reach me quickly. The lifeguard was focused on getting other people out of the water and hadn't noticed our situation yet. Karen kept repositioning me, turning me towards where people had spotted the shark. Her nails were leaving scratches all over my shoulders and arms as I struggled. I managed to elbow her in the ribs, which made her grip loosen slightly, but she just cursed and grabbed my hair instead. She yelled at me to stop fighting, calling me a little brat and saying it was better me than her. Something in me snapped at that moment. I don't know if it was adrenaline or just pure survival instinct, but I brought my foot down hard on hers, then twisted my body violently to the side. I felt some of my hair get pulled out as I broke free, but I didn't care. I ran as fast as I could through the water, my legs feeling like lead. When I reached the shore, my mom wrapped me in a towel while my dad and several other adults were screaming at Karen, who was still standing in the water, completely frozen. The lifeguard finally noticed and swam out to get her. It turned out there was indeed a shark, but it was a small nurse shark that had come closer to shore than usual. It wasn't even interested in people and had already swum away. But that didn't excuse what she did. When the lifeguard brought her back to shore, she tried to act like nothing happened. She tried claiming that she was just trying to help me because I was panicking and she was keeping me calm. My dad shouted back that she had used me as a shield, which everyone had seen. She denied it completely, insisting she would never do such a thing, and was only trying to protect me. My mom pointed out the scratches and bruises all over me, reminding her there were witnesses everywhere. Several people who had been in the water came forward and confirmed what happened. The beach patrol called the police, and they took statements from everyone. Karen kept changing her story. First, she was helping me, then she didn't remember what happened because she was in shock. Then she tried claiming I had attacked her. The police took loads of photos of my injuries, the scratches on my shoulders and arms, the bruises from where she'd gripped me, and even the spot where she'd pulled out some of my hair. They arrested her right there on the beach for assault of a minor. My parents pressed charges and we learned she had a history of similar entitled behavior. Apparently she'd been banned from several local businesses for assaulting staff when she didn't get her way. The judge wasn't impressed with her at all. She ended up getting sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and had to pay for all my medical expenses plus damages. She also has to attend mandatory counseling and anger management classes. She is banned from all public beaches in the county for 5 years. My parents used part of the settlement money to pay for therapy sessions for me, which really helped with the anxiety I developed about going into the water again. The rest they put into my college fund. The resort felt so bad about what happened that they gave us a free week-long stay for the following year. We went back, and I'm slowly getting comfortable in the ocean again. This time, though, I stay much closer to shore and always keep my parents within arm's reach. I later found out that the woman was some local real estate agent who thought she was hot stuff because she sold luxury beachfront properties. Well, her face was all over the local news after this incident, and her agency fired her. Last I heard, she had to move to another state because no one would hire her after what she did. I've been teaching middle school for about 7 years now, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I started my career as a corporate trainer, but after 3 years of teaching adults how to use spreadsheets and giving presentations about quarterly goals, I realized I was missing something meaningful in my life. My younger sister, who's been teaching elementary school since she graduated college, always talked about how rewarding it was to shape young minds and make a real difference. So I went back to school, got my teaching certification, and landed a job at a local middle school. Middle schoolers are a special bunch. They're old enough to have real conversations with, but young enough to still have that childlike wonder and creativity that makes teaching so much fun. One of my current 7th grade students really stands out. He has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but rather than letting it hold him back, he channels all that energy into creating things with his hands. Every day, he brings something new to fidget with. Yesterday it was yarn, today it's paper, tomorrow it might be rubber bands or pipe cleaners. Our interactions usually go something like this. I'll ask him to clear his desk so we can start the lesson, and he'll excitedly show me his latest creation, usually a paper crane that can transform into a boat with a few folds. When I remind him we need to focus on math, he'll try to negotiate, asking if he can keep just one piece and promising not to make any more. These little negotiations have become part of our daily routine. He's incredibly bright and always tries to find clever loopholes in my requests. It's never disruptive or disrespectful, just playful banter between us. Like this one time, I asked him to put away his yarn, and he cleverly pointed out that it was actually nylon cord, not yarn, suggesting that technically different materials might be allowed. When I sighed and insisted it needed to go away, he tried one last attempt, asking if he could just keep it under his desk. He always knows when to stop though. Once he's had his fun with the wordplay, he'll do what he's asked with a grin. Yesterday though, he completely turned the tables on me. I walked into class and found his desk covered in origami. There must have been at least 20 folded paper creations spread out across his workspace. He immediately declared that I couldn't tell him to stop cutting paper today. When I asked why, he proudly explained that he wasn't cutting anything. He was just folding. I thought I was so clever when I responded by asking him to please stop manipulating paper so we could start class. I even gave him a little victorious smile, thinking I'd finally outsmarted him. But then his eyes lit up with that mischievous spark I've come to know so well. He repeated my words about stopping paper manipulation with a gleam in his eye. Before I could process what was happening, he started clearing his desk, not just of his origami but everything. His textbook, gone. His notebook, into his backpack. His worksheet, disappeared. When I asked what he was doing, he explained with perfect logic that he was following my instructions, since I'd said to stop manipulating paper and all his school supplies were made of paper, he couldn't touch any of them. The whole class burst out laughing, and I couldn't help but join in. He had completely outmaneuvered me with my own words. He sat there with an empty desk, looking proud as could be. I admitted defeat, acknowledging that he'd got me this round. He responded sweetly that he'd learned from the best, meaning me. Then he gave me a playful wink and started putting his school supplies back on his desk, minus the origami, of course. The rest of the class went smoothly after that, though I could see him occasionally fighting the urge to fold just one more paper crane. This kind of interaction is exactly why I love teaching middle school. These kids are starting to develop their own personalities and sense of humor, and they're learning how to use their wit in clever ways. Sure, some days are challenging and not every student is as easy to work with, but moments like these make it all worthwhile. I want to share a story about my father that happened a few years ago. It's one of his favorite stories to tell at family gatherings, and honestly, I can see why. My father has been a firearms instructor for over 2 decades. He is the kind of person who takes gun safety and responsibility extremely seriously. He's trained countless people, including law enforcement officers, and has always emphasized that firearms are tools for protection, not intimidation. That one day, he was driving home after finishing up a training session at the range. He was tired but satisfied, having helped a group of new gun owners understand the importance of proper handling and safety protocols. The route he usually takes involves several roundabouts, which at the time were still under construction. The city had been working on improving the infrastructure, but it was still a mess, with only one lane operational. He was about halfway through one of these roundabouts when everything came to a sudden halt. The car in front of him, a shiny new SUV, had stopped completely, blocking the entire lane. Through the rear window, he could see the driver, clearly engaged in what seemed to be a very animated phone conversation. My father waited patiently for about a minute, thinking maybe it was an emergency call. But when another minute passed and cars started piling up behind him, he gave a gentle honk to remind the driver that she was blocking traffic. The response he got was unexpected. The driver, without even turning around, stuck her hand out the window and flipped him off. My father called out in, asking her to move her car. The lady didn't budge. She just continued her conversation as if she owned the road. At this point, my father was getting frustrated. He honked again, this time longer. Growing increasingly annoyed, my father yelled at her to move her car, using a rather unflattering term to address her. What happened next was both shocking and almost comical. The lady finally turned around, but instead of moving her car, she reached for something in her passenger seat. Through her window appeared a small pistol, bright pink in color, probably one of those fashion statement firearms that some people buy to look cute rather than for practical use. Now, here's where it gets interesting. My father, being a firearms instructor in a state with strong Second Amendment rights, always carries his registered 9mm pistol with him. He's never had to use it in a threatening situation, and he's always preached about responsible gun ownership. But this time, seeing this entitled woman waving around a pink pistol like it was a toy, something in him just snapped. He calmly reached for his holster, pulled out his significantly larger 9mm, and held it up where she could see it through his windshield. With a smirk, he shouted that his was bigger. The change in her demeanor was instant and hilarious. Her eyes went wide, and suddenly that important phone call wasn't so important anymore. She dropped her pink pistol onto the passenger seat, nearly fumbled with her steering wheel, and floored the accelerator. Her SUV screeched away, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and the fading sound of squealing rubber. When she sped off, she almost hit one of the construction barriers in her panic to get away. My father just sat there shaking his head and laughing. He holstered his weapon and continued his drive home. But now he had a new favorite story to tell. This incident actually led to some changes in the area. After my father reported the incident to local law enforcement, complete with dash cam footage he always keeps running, they increased police presence around the construction zones. They also expedited the completion of the roundabout project, adding proper signage and multiple lanes to prevent similar situations. The entitled lady was never identified, but her pink pistol became something of a legend at my father's shooting range. He now uses this story in his training sessions as an example of how not to handle firearms, though he admits his own response wasn't exactly by the book either. Whenever he tells this story at family gatherings, he always ends it with his favorite punchline about how it was the first time he got to tell a woman that his was bigger. And every time, without fail, my mother rolls her eyes while trying to hide her smile, and everyone else breaks into laughter. It's become such a classic family story that even my kids now ask for Grandpa's pink gun story when we visit. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.